Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of The Followers. And this week we have decided to take it right back to a very specific and kind of individual topic. So we're going to speak about protein today. It's going to be first in a little bit of a series on our three macronutrients, and then we'll develop that out into how to manage overall intake for sporting endeavors as well as just everyday life eventually. So we're back again with John, Shane, and myself. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Did yeah, so protein. What is it? Why do we need it? Shane, have you any particular thoughts on that?
Yes, I suppose protein's kind of your go-to supplement. Like when you think supplements, 9 out of 10 people are going to think a big tub of gold standard whey. Like that's kind of what people see when they see supplements. I'm assuming along the sports performance route, it was probably the biggest one or the kind of first real supplement that kind of broke into the market. But in essence, it's one of the main food groups. So it's one of your macronutrients, your protein, carbohydrates, fats, and its main goal is going to be recovery of the muscle. So in its simplest form, when you work out or when you train, you're going to break down the muscle. Protein is there to help build that muscle back up that little bit stronger. So you're breaking it down and then it's just repairing coming through. So kind of the main things the people kind of don't get about protein is they tend to like fluctuate their intake, especially athletes, in days that they're not training compared to days that they do. So for example, like everyone would think, oh, straight after I go to the workout or gym, I'll just have a protein shake. And say if they're going training, say if they're training weights in the morning and then they have a football session in the evening, protein shake after both of them, that's fine getting their protein in. But then you find when they don't do that on maybe a rest day or a down day, they don't get their daily requirement. So they kind of let that slip. So I was trying to explain it like, say if you get a cut on your arm, it'll kind of scab over, but it doesn't just magically regenerate completely in kind of overnight when you're asleep. It's still repairing, it's still scabbing over the next few days. That's kind of how your muscles are working as well. So the protein is still working through the recovery process, even when you're not training. So it's almost nearly more important on those days when you're not training to make sure that it is recovering at its highest level. So it's a recovery tool that's so important, and it really is. It's something that people they do pay attention to it, but they think once they've got it in that window, that's all the protein they need. If that makes sense. I don't know if you guys agree.
Yeah, I would. One of the main things that I do come across when people do discuss protein is similar to theirs that they're looking at their protein intake from a supplement and completely ignoring the rest of their diet and how I know we've discussed this previously about how you can consider whey protein or casein to be a food in itself. And while this is the case, like all we get from that is our amino acids. We don't get anything else. Whereas eating our, I suppose, going down the food route is the first port of call when it comes to getting protein on board. I suppose just diet or any dietary um, changes or interventions or approaches. It's always food first. It should always be food first. But I do find that I'm regularly in a conversation with people who are trying to, like you said, cover over cover over a wound with like with a plaster where it actually needs a lot more work than that. So that's often how people look at whey protein or supplementing with protein. That this is how they should be getting their protein in, and in that short time window, and that's it. Whereas in actual fact, like a better approach is your overall protein intake across the day and having it in regular kind of intervals too. Following your main meal pattern with a very traditional kind of way of going about it could be your three main meals and two snacks in the day, and having sufficient level of protein at each one of those points of eating or of intake. I suppose with that, I do you to get the to bring about muscle protein synthesis, which we need for muscle recovery and repair and building, is to ensure we're getting in sufficient level of protein as well at each one of those intervals. So while the overall intake across the day, is important, ensuring that you're getting in about 20 grams of protein at a meal or in a snack is incredibly important too. As for the overall intake, a lot of that, like working that out, can be quite individual. So we can put a blanket kind of statement there for athletes or people who partake in maybe resistance type sport or repeat sprintability type sport, that maybe you should be somewhere in the region of 1.6 or 1.8 grams to 2.2 grams per kg of body weight. Again, that's just a general range. A lot of people do try to tend to go towards that 2 gram per kg of body weight range until they start to see how much food that actually means that they have to eat and how full they are throughout their day. So education around getting in good quality protein through your food in your normal diet can be key in that regard. That you're not trying to, and this is often where I do come across athletes, especially, or your everyday gym goer, possibly as well, actually looking for their supplement to try and meet those goals because they're unsure of how to actually get enough or sufficient levels of protein in their diet without stuffing themselves massively. Um, Depending on what you're doing, then if you're focusing on weight loss, or maybe maybe you don't actually require that significant level of protein, it can be quite individual, the amount that you should need. But from a kind of a blanket approach, I generally have advise people to be in that 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kg of body weight area.
Yeah, so that's just looking at the overall amount of protein. We'll probably dig in a bit deeper there. There's a few studies I was just looking up over the last few days. I was writing a blog post on this last night. Once we dig a bit deeper into the total amount of protein, we'll start examining different types. If you're getting your protein from a few different sources, does that make a difference to what you said earlier there, Damien, the muscle protein synthesis? When we look at what that is and how it actually happens in the body, and then maybe touch on time and particularly the impact of it being more spread out across our day. So you were saying there the 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kg. Now, that might go over a few people's heads. What we mean there is that your overall weight in kilograms, so say if you're an 80 kg athlete, that means you're looking for 1.6, or if we just stick to 2 to keep it a round number for the start, if you're looking for 2 grams per kg of body weight, an 80 kg athlete is looking to eat 160 grams of protein across an entire day, and pretty much every day. 2 grams is realistically at the higher end of what you require. Like 1.6, 1.8 tends to be enough, and we'll dig into that in a bit of detail as well. Some of the research I was looking over the last few days kind of gave me a bit of guidance on how we can refine that down a bit further. But if you're just to think real basically, a standard scoop of whey protein tends to have about 24 grams of protein. A chicken fillet tends to have about 30. A large steak would be up around 40, 45. An egg has 6. So you can start to see then how much you actually need to eat across a day to get that full, whether it be 160, 150, 170 grams of protein in a day. And as well, to break down the recommendations, the 1.6 to 2.2, as much as I can see, if you divide that into 3 separate categories, 1.6 to 1.8 tends to work quite well if you're trying to put on weight, particularly lean mass. I don't think anyone really goes out on fat, maybe. But how that works is because protein can be so satiating, and what I mean by that is it tends to fill you up more than other macronutrients like carbohydrate or fat. So because it fills you more, it's harder to actually get more calories on board. So staying at the lower end of protein ingestion or whatever protein recommendations works quite well putting on weight, because it leaves more room to eat more carbohydrate, which doesn't fill you up as quick, and also fuels the workouts you need to put on the extra muscle mass. The 1.8 to 2.0 grams per kg then works well if you're trying to maintain weight, and then go above the 2 gram per kg if you're looking to lose a bit of weight. The main reason people thought this was important is because having higher levels of protein will help you hold on to more muscle. Now, Eric Helms' masters found that didn't really have much of an impact. They compared one group having 1.6 grams per kg and another group having 2.8 grams per kg on a slight calorie deficit over a period of time to look at muscle loss. And they actually found there was no real difference in terms of the protein content on the two. The most important thing was to make sure you're still being exposed to resistance training or weight training. And that's the key in holding on to muscle if you're trying to lose weight. That where having the higher protein intake is really helpful because it just leaves you feeling fuller for longer. And because that's taking up a lot of your calories, there's less variability in the carbohydrate and fat that you eat. It just means there's less room then to go eat kind of your high sugar, high fat stuff that doesn't leave you feeling as full, often tends to leave you want to eat a bit more of whatever it is, and just leaves you in a bit more control of your diet. So, and then if we were to go above that again, above the 2.2 range, while all Jose Antonio's work would suggest it does you no harm, it just becomes quite expensive to actually live that way. Now, I know some people push the carnivore diet, and we certainly won't be here, but and some people say it's great for you, whereas to be missing out on some of those major nutrients and macronutrients, it doesn't really make sense. But it would become a very, very expensive diet to try and follow. That's kind of stuff I've been looking into around overall protein intake. Would you have any kind of follow on to that?
No, just in addition to the cost of eating, say if you take your front row or second row in rugby, if you're taking somebody who's in that regard, to eat, there's the cost of eating 2 or 2.2 grams per kg of body weight of protein. There would be huge for your athlete who'd be 100 kg to 125 kg, 130 kg. Like there's the cost of that would be huge, but the actual quantity of food that you'd have to eat there, the quantity of satiating food, it's pretty big. So for people in that regard who might be looking to, say you take somebody like you take that rugby athlete, for example, who, like, we'll go at the very high end of this, but if you take that rugby athlete there who may be at that 100 and say 20 odd range, and they might be trying to bring themselves down to maybe the 115 range or so, maybe drop a bit of weight, that with the level of training that they do go through, often they're gymming 4 or 5 days in the week with 2 sessions on the field. They're putting themselves through quite a lot, so recovery is huge for them. Having sufficient levels of protein in there is massive, but to ensure that they're filling themselves, and often when you get to that size, you do have quite an appetite to fill themselves, that can be quite beneficial, but to push up to that range. But there's no need to continue that long term. If you're bringing your weight down, you're heading in the right direction. You can tend to bring, you can, like you said there, Murph, bring your protein level down and make eating that little bit more, I suppose, easier. Because it can be quite a chore, and it can almost be, like you used to go to the gym to do structured training. You're almost structuring your day very specifically to hit that protein goal, but that can be quite tough, especially for, say, semi-pro or amateur athletes there who have to work a job as well. Like, that can be very, very tough undertaking. So just, it is important to keep in mind that you can, that it isn't something you have to keep going long term. It can be used as a, raising up your protein for a short term to help you get to a specific target, and that then you can recover efficiently while on those lower intakes is important. And again, it's often where guys do kind of stick to supplementing as their route to try and get that level of intake up as high as it needs to be. But again, it's not something that has to be long term. It can be beneficial short term to make it a little bit easier, but thinking outside the box, and not looking at this and going like, all right, I have to do this for the rest of my days. You can just use it for a short period of time. That's the only thing that I do see a lot of is in guys who are that big, that it can be a bit of a struggle to keep it going.
One of the things about high protein intake as well, the three of us are quite used to having a high protein diet. So to us now, it's become a moderate protein diet because it's just normalized for us. And that, like, eating 1.8 grams per kg would be a very normal day of eating. Whereas if you could compare that to the public health guidelines, where 0.8, like less than half that, is the actual public health recommendation for protein intake. Like you're actually doubling that to even meet the kind of what the athletic population is. So while people who are not used to eating relatively high in protein would look at us, and we'll give a few suggestions as we go on today of how to meet that in a day and across 2 meals, and be like, that is so much. How do you manage it? Once you get used to it, you realize that not like we would find it very normalized, and even hearing of people who eat ridiculously high levels of protein, it's probably not a huge pile on top of what we're generally going for. So to, I suppose, to wrap that little section up there, a high protein diet to us is very, very high. A moderate protein diet to us now is probably quite a bit higher than what an awful lot of people who are probably just getting into training or who aren't fully aware of having relatively high levels of protein across the day fully is. And then the other bit on, as well as the expense of eating relatively high in protein, it takes a bit of effort and planning. That if you want to eat some carbohydrate, you can eat a piece of fruit. It's quite easy to make a bit of pasta, a bit of rice, some spuds, whatever that way. Whereas protein will generally need to be cooked or prepared in advance in some form, so it does take that little bit more planning. And as well, we look at a few kind of tips for that as we go on. Just in terms of overall protein content, when you get into the bodybuilding first, Shane, did you find that something hard to adjust at?
Yes and no. So I was kind of more, I would have been high enough protein anyway, because I would have been coming from a sporting background and looking to get, kind of just maximize my time in the gym. So it would have been a little bit, but I nearly would have gone, obviously when I first started out and I didn't really know as much as I know now, I almost would have gone completely in the opposite direction and really overshot my protein intake, because that's what all the magazines said to do. That's kind of what you saw on TV. That's what you ever read, like an article that says Ronnie Coleman has 300 grams of protein before he does his 7-hour arm workout. That's kind of just the general gist you got at like a younger age. So I would have overshot it, and then as I kind of grew to know more, my carbohydrate intake would have increased, my fat intake would have increased, and protein would have come down in line with that. So initially, as I kind of went for that, it just seemed like I was trying to just eat as much protein as I could all the time. And then as I actually adjusted to what is a high protein diet, rather than say the hyper protein diet I would have done at first, it was kind of, like you said, it was kind of normalized already. So it was easier to scale, because I was almost scaling back down to a high protein diet because of the mistakes I'd made previously. But again, when it is, like, it's a very big thing to adjust to if you're used to a diet that's quite high in carbohydrates and fat. And again, trying to push. But the only thing I would say on that is that 0.8, the public health guidelines, is probably too low for your general population anyway. So again, I would never recommend anyone to be below 1 gram per kilogram body fat, or from kilogram body weight, sorry. And even if you take away the protein requirements completely out of the equation, if you're only at 0.8 protein, it leaves a lot that has to be filled with fats and carbohydrates for someone who is only following that. So they're admittedly not an athletic person, so they don't need that energy that they're going to be getting from the carbohydrates and fats. So it's almost creating that weight gain cycle before it's even started if you're trying to just stick to that 0.8. That's how I feel anyway. And then obviously there's the fact that they're not getting enough protein in to help recover.
I suppose that's just to prevent muscle breakdown. Realistically, it's just to, at that bottom end, is really just to prevent muscle disappearing. Yeah, which you're right though, it is way too low. And it is something though that it often does get cited, not necessarily by not by professionals, but it does get cited by your layperson quite a little bit, that like, oh, when I might be suggesting to increase protein across the day in line with maybe an uptake in exercise or whatever like that for somebody who's a complete beginner, that they kind of look at it like, whoa, this is, I know that this is the public health guidelines. Why must I go well beyond that? And it is important that people do understand that there's a difference between public health guidelines and having enough for what you're, to move more towards what might be considered an optimal type of protein.
Because the stigma is still kind of that protein is like just a performance supplement. Like people will hear protein, they'll be like, oh sure, I don't want to be massive, and think like if they eat over that 0.8 that they're automatically going to put on 20 kilos of muscle, and just it's going to be that easy. Like it's all in the protein. It's just it's changed. Like it's got a lot better, but there's still that kind of negative correlation with it.
I wonder how many Irish mothers around the country have dumped
Bait their
protein
children
for
for
equating
having
to
yeah.
steroids. You don't need to be on those steroids, and it's whey protein dumped.
Too important, just little things to note before we go on to looking at different types of protein, that public health guidelines are generally made at the very lower end just to ensure people aren't deficient in something. And that if we were to look at public health recommendations for exercise, the actual recommendations here are to do resistance training at least twice a week just to be healthy. So if you are doing resistance training twice a week, then you probably need higher protein to actually help you recover from that anyway. So either way, it doesn't really make sense for it to be that low. I think it was just a case of what is the minimum we could put out here that people wouldn't get unhealthy from, that the general population, or even the lower end of general population in terms of health, would actually manage to get in. Because I think if we were to actually measure protein intake across the population, and bear in mind most of these recommendations come from America, the actual protein intake could be so low per kg body weight, and that if they set it any higher, you'd have so few people meeting it that would just end up becoming completely ignored. The other point I'd make on general recommendations, that when people think they need to put on weight, and I see this so often, particularly in S&C coaches with a moderate to low grasp of nutrition, they will really push protein on people who are trying to gain some weight. And if you go into a group and say, yeah, no, they're doing a lot of gym work, they want to put on a bit of weight, I'm just trying to tell them, eat more protein, eat more protein, eat more protein. Then you, as the nutritionist, comes in and chats to the player or the athlete, they're like, I'm just eating so much protein, like I can't cope with it all. And you work out how much they're eating, and they're around 250 grams a day, and this is a 70 kg athlete. You're like, yeah, maybe go easy on that a bit. You're absolutely stuffed from it. There's certainly no need for all that to help you recover. We need to cut that way back, maybe take out a third of it, get a shot of carbohydrate there, both to boost your energy levels in the gym and just to make a bit more room in your stomach to help digest all this and get more calories on board. They're just the two bits I put on there. To look at the actual type of protein, so you can say that you can get your protein from meat. You can certainly meet the protein recommendations, although it would be a little harder from non-meat or plant-based sources. And then you have the supplements. Have any of you any thoughts on how the different types of protein would impact overall synthesis, improved breakdown, anything like that? Actually, Damien, with your completely biased background, having worked in the supplement industry, would you start us off there and make the case for, are supplements helpful?
They are helpful when the rest of your diet is in tune. Shane, I think you said it perfectly a few episodes back, that a supplement is there. The key is in the name. It's to supplement your diet to help you meet gaps, or to fill in gaps that you otherwise can't get from your diet. So if your diet is not something that's of any focus by you, and you're looking down a supplement route, then you're completely missing the wood from the trees, and you do need to kind of bring yourself back a little bit and reassess where you're at. Now, supplements can be brilliant, especially for somebody, as I was saying a while ago, who might be up trying to get the higher end of intake, from a protein perspective, or for somebody who has to have a very maybe competes at quite a high level and has quite a short turnaround between training sessions. So say 24 hours, between training sessions, then you want to ensure that you've recovered, and that you've started your recovery process as soon as possible, following a training session. Then the likes of whey protein there, mixed with a banana, like right after a field session, or right after a gym session, to get your recovery process going, is quite beneficial, for a lot of people who are in those time restricted recovery windows. However, again, if that's all that you're focused on, is that quick recovery, and then the rest of your protein intake across the day, across that 24-hour period, or in general, across your day to day, every day, if it's not good, then that speed of getting that recovery process going off the mark is, it's not going to do anything, anything wonderful. It's not going to make you it's not going to help you improve as an athlete or improve your training, because it does, your overall intake across the day does matter so much, more so than just hitting that that immediate window that people love to focus in on. So there's quite like a little bit. There's a couple of moving parts there, but the first thing I would say is you are looking at your overall intake from a food first perspective, and then if you're struggling, and or of any specific things in that time, to focus in on them afterwards. But first and foremost, your overall intake throughout the day is key, and it should be food first. Now, in with that, having a variety of different sources of protein is a good idea too. As we get so much more from the foods that we are eating, we don't just eat protein. We eat food, and it contains protein. It might contain some carbohydrate or some fat, all of which have parts to play in our overall development, and I suppose our existence in general. As well as a host of different micronutrients, vitamins, minerals as well. So we don't just eat protein as in a vacuum, like that's what whey protein is, that it is just those amino acids. But from a dietary perspective, mixing it, across your days, it can be quite easy, or I suppose it can be quite easy when you're in our position to figure that out. But just pulling yourself back and taking a look at what foods you like to eat, how you like to structure your main meals in the day, and then keeping in mind the foods that you do enjoy, and just ensure that you're having enough from those. And with that, I suppose it's even more important for people who are vegetarian or vegan athletes that they are making sure that they're not going down, say, a line of having. So if we take your normal everyday person who follows a kind of just a general diet, they might have some Greek yogurt for breakfast, or something like that, where they'll get sufficient level of protein from that one source. And they might have chicken breast for lunch, and they'll get enough amino acids from that chicken at lunch to meet their muscle, to bring about muscle protein synthesis through hitting their leucine threshold. But you don't get that from any one plant source of protein. So it is important that you mix and match different plant sources, so that you're bringing in a variety of different amino acids from different plant sources, which will bring about which will help you to bring about meeting that leucine threshold to bring about muscle protein synthesis. So that's the only area that I would be kind of like, right, you do need to focus in a little bit more here and ensure you're getting, 2 or 3 different sources of protein in a meal there, if you are vegetarian or vegan. However, for your normal everyday diet, you can hit, you can get enough in, through one food group. All right. I'm not even sure if that answered the question there, to be honest with you, Murph. I just kind of left a load of stuff run out of me there.
No, that's all good. That's all good. One of the things are 2 things you brought up there that are fairly linked to each other. You mentioned amino acids and leucine. So from, that's kind of where we're eventually going to go with this, looking at types of proteins, that all protein is not the same. The different sources that it comes from, they have, so proteins made up from a number of amino acids, both essential and non-essential. We're not going to go into exactly what they are right now, but from a number of experimental studies that started off looking at, first to find overall protein recommendations, and then to dig a bit deeper and see, do different types of protein matter. They have found that of those amino acids, leucine appears to be the most important one for not preventing muscle breakdown, but encouraging muscle turnover after it's been broken down from resistance training. And then to dig into different types of protein, those proteins that come from animals tend to have the highest levels of leucine. Now, from animals, obviously enough, meat comes from animals, but also dairy, milk, yogurt, whatever like that, and eggs, they also are derived from animals. You should know biology, how all this basic stuff works. So any of the animal-based proteins will tend to have the highest levels of leucine, and so contribute the best to overall muscle turnover, to encourage just, after that breakdown in the gym, recover next 24, 36, 48 hours, whatever like that. Any of your own thoughts on that then, Shane? Just looking at types of protein sources, what you've looked at, and what kind of has guided your preferences over time?
Yeah, well, I'd definitely be an animal protein lover, so I've no problem on the leucine front. But yeah, again, it's so, like, as you guys mentioned, it's generally not something like in the traditional Irish diet, I suppose, where it's like it's mainly built around kind of eggs, your meat and two veg. It's never usually a problem because you're getting it in from kind of leucine rich foods. It's only really when you touch on the vegetarian, vegan, even vegetarian, not even to as much of an extent, because it's usually fish, dairy, and eggs are usually a staple of that kind of a diet, and it's just an increased vegetable intake, but it still has that prime protein source. It's going to be that complete protein source. So we didn't really touch on it, but a complete protein source is essentially a protein source that contains all those essential amino acids that your body can't produce itself. So it's amino acids that have to be gotten through the diet. So I suppose the positive for vegans is if you do have a varied diet with a lot of different vegan protein sources in it, you usually do hit all those markers. So again, like there's not a lot of complete vegan protein sources, but they're all incomplete in different ways, if that makes sense. You're almost trying to put the jigsaw puzzle together to hit on all of the essential amino acid levels. So again, it's so important to have that varied. And that's when like a supplement, like say something like a pea protein, can come in handy. If you are someone who maybe predominantly gets their protein sources from beans or from soy or from things like that, but it's a one source you can look into, because there is a number of different vegan proteins, and again, they won't really be complete sources, but they can help to fill in those gaps, and it makes it a little bit easier rather than trying to track every single thing you do to get the amounts of each amino acid, because nobody can live like that. It's not sustainable. But if you can find a few, even it only takes maybe 3 or 4 different types to kind of piece that together and make sure that you have a complete protein intake, even though you're not eating complete protein foods, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Just another point then I'd bring up on types of protein. What has grown massively in popularity in the last couple of years are protein bars, where we have our own kind of Irish version, Fulfill. The Quest ones in America are one of the big ones to take off. And the quality or type of protein those does not tend to be great. So when we go for convenient protein sources, whether it be the whey shakes, the protein milks that you buy, they tend to be very high quality protein. Now, whey doesn't tend to include a huge pile of other nutrients, as Damien touched on, but in terms of just pure quality protein, very high. The protein bars are not the same. Now, well, they obviously don't give away their full secret on exactly what's in there. The dairy protein tends to be a bit down the list, and that the majority that's contained in there tends to come from collagen. Collagen isn't that easy for the body to break down and actually use as building blocks for muscle. And so, like, while a protein bar may say contains 20 grams of protein, of those 20 grams, I would say we're possibly only getting around 8, maybe 10 to actually use for overall muscle turnover, as opposed to in whey or milk, you're going to get the majority of it, and it's quite good, and as protein goes, fast to digest. I know, is it Rebecca Nolan is her name? T to triceps on Instagram.
Oh yeah,
has
Rebecca,
given
yeah.
some really good breakdowns on protein bars and just other nutrition stuff in general.
Mm-hmm.
She's someone I'd actually love to get on this someday. So if you're listening, hit us up. Otherwise, we'll probably just get on to you sometime. So.
She's from Kerry, man. Man, she's from Castle Island. I just wave at her there, and sure, I'll get her on.
Oh, yeah, this is on your to-do list now, Damien, for the next couple of weeks. So
brilliant.
write it down as soon as
homework for the week.
Any other thoughts then on just other protein sources or types that may be a little misleading or people may not have full understanding of?
I suppose on bars, when you said it there, like, it's a great point. They usually are inferior, but they're not all completed equal either. Like, there's very much a different standard in them. So usually you look to see, there's a little, you probably won't see, or we won't be able to hold it up now, but there's a little Informed by Sport logo. It's like a little yellow man and he's running. But it basically means that the supplements have been independently tested, and usually that they contain quality ingredients, and more than likely they are kind of a whey base. So things like the Grenade supplement, the Carb Killer bars, are like that. And then there's a handful of supplement companies who do a higher quality protein bar. And again, like, most of the time protein bars are also not going to be the best kind of sugar and fat wise. So if you look at it at a normal time, it can be the same calories as say a Mars bar, same sugar content, it just has extra protein thrown in on top of it. So just because it says protein on it doesn't mean like it's great for you. It just has extra protein in it. Like it could be anything and it just says protein on it. That just means it has protein. It doesn't fill in any of the other health requirements that you're kind of asking for. So it's not necessarily a diet bar. Like some of them, especially when I was living out in America, some of them can have 500, 600, 700 calories. And all you see advertised is like 30 grams of protein. So it automatically draws your eye and you go get it. But like it's a meal or two in one bar. So it's just something to kind of look out for.
Weetabix that normal Weetabix is I think 3.4 grams per 100 gram, and protein Weetabix is 4.3, so it's not even a full gram extra per 100 grams, but it's just protein Weetabix on it.
And that's a great point by the two of you, is that like we went through a phase a few years ago that seems to have left a lasting impact on a lot of people, where protein was just added to everything. Like I felt like there was a point where almost if I went to buy a shopping bag, that it would be a protein shopping bag. Like it's just because protein is added to something does not make it healthier, which is often where I suppose a yardstick that people love to measure off. That because protein is added, that it's there for a healthy product. You have to keep it in mind with your overall intake, and that's where just like going down like a food first approach, having some idea what your overall protein requirements are, and seeing how you can find that, figure out a way to get that in across your day. And like there's nothing wrong at all with having protein bars before we get slapped with a lawsuit here by any of the bigger companies or whatever. But there's nothing wrong with them, but treat it like you said there, Shane, like a chocolate bar with a bit of possibly poorly digestible protein added to it, it's just if you want to have it, have it in your diet, then there's nothing wrong with that. The same way there's nothing wrong with having any kind of confectionery or anything in your diet once it's limited, and it doesn't become a staple of your diet, and you're not depending on it for your to try and get your protein target or whatever it is across the day. You should almost treat it like, and that's how I tend to ask people to treat them like a chocolate bar. If you like having them, go for it. If not, maybe find a bar that you do like, and keep your overall protein intake as something separate.
Yeah, if you want some chocolate, have some chocolate. If you don't want to go too mad and it doesn't fit into your overall calories, have less, whether it be a Freddo, whether it be one of the mini bars, and you can trust yourself to keep a packet of them in the house and not eat them all in one sitting, which is quite difficult, I think we'll all admit. But bear in mind that if you want a chocolate bar and you'll say, oh, I'll have a protein chocolate bar, that'll be healthy, it doesn't quite work as black or white as that. The last thing to move on to then is we look at some protein timing. So we'll all have seen the lads who go train and before they even go to do the cool down, they've pulled the chocolate milk out of their gear bag on the pitch because they're afraid they'll miss out on the potential recovery while they're doing their stretches. Or the lad in the gym who pours the water into the shaker before he's even moved on to his last working set to kickstart recovery nice and early. How important is that protein straight away afterwards, or does timing matter at all? Shane, you kick us off with this one.
No, well, I mean, we've all been that guy who had water and filled up the shaker straight away after the gym, so let's not badmouth him too much. I mean, he's an alright guy. But yeah, so it's not really like it's been hugely blown out of proportion, and it's mostly on supplement marketing, really. Like it's that thing when you see Steve Cook or something just have the shake straight afterwards, and you're like, God, that must be the answer. That must be the key, is just having it straight away and get your recovery process started straight away. When in realistically, getting carbohydrates in post is more important from a time sensitive point of view. So it's obviously, if they can get it in within the next half an hour to an hour, great. But again, there's going to be minimal change or minimal difference it's going to make if it takes you an hour, 2 hours. If it takes the drive home, if it takes anything like that, it's not the end of the world. Like it's literally focusing on the tiniest minutia when it doesn't really matter. Like it's not going to make a huge difference. It's not going to make a noticeable difference to performance. It's really just with what's going to fit into your lifestyle. So when it's convenient for you to get that protein in, it's more important to focus on your overall goal. So getting it in spaced throughout the day, it doesn't necessarily have to be programmed around that workout. Whereas when we talk about carbohydrates a little bit more in depth, they're going to be much more important to program either side of a workout to make sure that you're replacing and kind of fueling adequately for performance.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
ideally, like your protein would be spaced out evenly across the day because it's very slow to digest. The amino acids we talked about earlier, they take so long to actually be broken down by the body and get fully around that when muscle is broken down, it's not a case of the next piece of protein you eat recovers it. It takes 2 to 3 days for that recovery to fully happen, like Shane was
Yeah.
saying at the start. So you need those even doses of protein across the day. If we were to say a meal was important in terms of timing, you could probably say breakfast because you've gone 8 to 10 hours without a serving of protein there, as opposed to that shake and meal directly after training. You probably have quite a lot of the amino acids. If you had any kind of decent serving of protein in your meal pre-exercise game, whatever it is, those amino acids are still floating around the body and the blood afterwards anyway. So they're helping with recovery. It's not an on-off switch anyway. How recovery happens. Um, in terms of any go-to foods that we particularly like, I know Shane, you're such a fan of oats, but do you have any favorites in
Yeah.
terms of getting your protein in? Not that oats doesn't have any; it does have some there, but what are your own favorite sources?
Usually, because I find most people will struggle to get it in at a breakfast meal. So, as you're saying, if I was to pick a meal where it's important, it would be breakfast, but it's also the one that there's fewest options, I suppose, or most options that are picked would be like, say, during the week, most people would have cereal, or they'd have porridge, or they'd have fruit, which is all like great options, but there's very few kind of quick and easy proteiny sources, things that are at least advertised at kind of a mass market. So usually for breakfast, I have things like eggs, things like Greek yogurt with fruit, things that are kind of fairly easy to take on the stomach. Because I know a lot of people wouldn't really be super up for having a steak in first thing in the morning. But yeah, so things like that. Eggs would be a good go-to for me. Chicken, just because it's easy and convenient. You can kind of batch cook it to a degree where you can have 2 or 3 days worth of chicken cooked up and then fire through it as you need. So chicken and eggs would be the main ones for kind of convenience and ease throughout the week, I'd say.
Damien, you have been famed for having blue steaks for breakfast. What else do you like?
Oh God. No, my go-to is I'm a big advocate of just consistency. So my breakfast is pretty standard across the week, especially this time of year. I'll follow the Oat King's guidance during the winter months, but for the time being, it's I usually go for my low fat Greek yogurt or 0% fat Greek yogurt because they tend to be quite high. I've got the um, they're not the highest, so we might look for someone else. Aldi's own brand tends to be quite high, or else the Fage one is like 9 or 10 grams, and the 0% one from Aldi that I have at the moment is I think it's like 9.5 grams per hundred. So it's that's ideal. For me, I usually have about 250 grams of that for breakfast with some granola. Depending on what my day is, if I know I'm going to be exercising, it might be a bit bigger. Some granola and fruit thrown in, so I get a bit of everything in that way. Or else, like I might have a banana bread or something like that made, or if I'm putting in a bit more effort. But again, I'll throw in some of that Greek yogurt in on top of that. So I like to keep things pretty consistent with that if at all possible. If eating out or anything like that, then I normally do go down the egg route. Um, but with my first two options there that I go down with for breakfast anyway, you can clearly see there's a degree of laziness in there as well. That where I'm not interested in cooking much or putting a whole pile of time into something for the first meal of the day. As my dinners often tend to get quite a bit of focus. So um, yeah, or something like even like last night. No, I had I had a dinner an aubergine lasagna, so very low calorie, very high protein. In that I think I had 65 grams of protein in a serving, for 580 calories altogether. So like something like that. This is kind of where I come back to with people like looking into your diet, actually taking a keen interest in it for a few weeks to build up a bit of knowledge in it, that you can find it quite easy to get in large servings of protein while keeping calories kind of relatively under control. So basically, not having to stuff yourself massively while meeting your own targets. But yeah, I like to express myself a little bit more with dinners, but the breakfast I kind of keep it fairly consistent with a lot of Greek yogurt.
Yeah, because I haven't been in school now for 6 months, I've gotten a nice habit of having eggs. And what are actually I'm finding a great go-to for protein that I wasn't aware they were as high, but still low in calories, are both bacon medallions and actual packet ham, the wafer thin ham. Like I didn't realize it was that high in protein and very very simple to either cook or just put straight with some breakfast muffins or some Slimbos. And I'm back at school now, and I won't have the time luxury every morning. I'll have to reconsider that. Shane was saying there about the batch cooking chicken. The cook in the bag chicken can be so handy to cook up 6 fillets at once and have quite quickly then to just heat them up on their own. I love cooking a few butcher's burgers as well, but made for 5% mince. Same with turkey burgers. Have a few of them cooked. Very easy. Just have with some rice, pasta, spuds, whatever like that then as well. Salmon darns, you're talking about 28 grams, I think, per salmon darn. One thing with eggs is they're not as high in protein as they're made out to be. Like it's 6 grams per egg. So to have 3 eggs is 18 grams, which is a moderate enough serving, but that would lead to relatively high calories because you do have all your fats in there as well. So while they do have so many other nutrients in them, like eggs could nearly be classed as a vegetable, there's so many other nutrients in them that they are actually relatively high. They are quite high in calories based on the actual protein content compared to a lot of other more traditional protein sources. Your 0% Greek yogurt, another great example, and you will have other kind of I suppose, what you'd say, traditional protein content, like oats will have relatively high protein. Peanut butter is another one you need to be careful of in terms of like not
Overall calories.
actually that much protein considering the overall calories it contains. Any others then go-to foods we have or little tips we have?
Well, tuna for snacking. Tuna is one of the best sources you can get for high protein, low calories. Right, it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone's taste, that granted, but it's a fantastic source of protein there. If you're looking to maybe get something, maybe you find it hard to get a good protein snack in between meals, or if you're looking to kind of up the protein content of a salad or something like that at lunch, then tuna is a fantastic source of protein there that often does get overlooked. With that in mind, though, it does tend to be, especially the tinned tuna, can be, I suppose, regular intake of that, as in every day across the week, across a couple of months, it can tend to have high levels of mercury in it, or so it's just to be careful with that. It's not something that you make a staple of your day to day, but just if you're looking for to change things up from time to time, the tuna can be a handy option there.
Things like that banana bread that Damien mentioned, usually that's kind of made, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would make that with some type of protein powder as well, wouldn't you? So it would be relatively high for a snack. If you make something like that, it's roughly, again, I'm just talking from Damien's video, but it's give or take 10 slices, so it's 10 servings, which is the guts of 2 weeks worth of one snack a day. So something like that, putting a little bit of effort in one day, leads to a constant source of something you can rely on as a staple for the next 2 weeks. So it's not even, at the time it might seem, oh, well, baking's going to be a bit of a hassle, but it's 2 weeks worth of work essentially, rather than just going fiddling about looking for something for 10 minutes every day.
And that's the thing, is that often people kind of look at it as like, oh, I'm not great at cooking. I'm not so I'm not going to look into that. I made one there last night, and I did everything in the mix because I had obviously in the house. The whole thing was put together and in the baking tin within 10 minutes. I put it into the oven and I went off and I made dinner. I did some work. Like for the hour and a half that it was, or the 60, 70 minutes, sorry, that it was in the oven. Like you're not glued to standing there for the time it's cooking. It, like, in under 10 minutes I had it made, and there's, like, as I said, Shane, there's a great little protein snack there, just a snack in general that's going to have great quality. I make that with blended oats, so you've a great carbohydrate source there. You've protein inside there. You've some fruit thrown into it, and just top it off, there's a little bit of chocolate chips inside there, and like, so you can tick a lot of boxes with something like that. relatively
Sorry,
quickly.
go easy on the chocolate chips. This is supposed to be a health podcast. This is not
Dark
what I'm-
chocolate chips.
Oh, antioxidants, so healthy.
Same.
Sometimes I'm finding handy, and I'm hoping will become a staple when I go back to school next week. Mentally prepare myself. Are egg muffins. So just beating up all your eggs, bit of ham, bit of spinach, put them in the bun trays and into the oven for not as long as I thought the first time I made them. But hopefully they'll be handy enough sort there in the mornings. Anything else? Are we happy to wrap up on that? We're just on the 50-minute mark.
Yeah, no, I'm good at everything. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions from this, yeah, just to shoot them on to us. That's the only thing. If you feel like we missed something, or that there's an area that you're a little bit unsure of, then any questions at all, shoot them on to us. We'd be delighted to answer them for you here.
Yeah, so next week we're going to take a dive into carbohydrate with a specific half-hour section, just looking at the history of porridge oats. Shane is going to take us through it.
Yeah.
Going to bring Johnny Flavins in to help me with my presentation.
And hopefully in a few weeks, Damien will have done his homework and bring on one of our next guests there.
And hold him to it. If anybody sees Damien out and about, remind him that he has homework to do before next week's podcast. His mind tends to wander.
Lovely. Thanks very much.